Welcome to AMM 2450 and part 2 of Psychological Perspective on Consumerism. So last time we were talking about the consumer model. Now we're going to talk about factors that influence the consumer behavior. So this is kind of tying in what we've covered so far. So we talked about culture, right? Culture and its effect on consumer choices or potential effect. So it varies. There's a lot of diversity among consumers. It depends on your social class, influences from your family members, from your parents, how you were raised. Were you raised to be frugal? Were you raised to spend, and buy more and buy more? It depends on how you were raised. Your psychographic, so what you value, what's important to you. Obviously, you're going to be willing to spend more time and money on things that matter to you versus those that don't. Personality, your lifestyle, social influences, so your friends, your peers, what you see on social media, all this is part of the consumer culture, right? So this all affects your decisions as to how you respond to things like marketing, and it helps shape your decisions on what to buy. Then we see how that affects your psychological core, and that's the section we're discussing now. It's the psychology. So motivation, like I said, that's a key word. What motivates us to buy what we buy? Pick from choices that we have, what brand, what color, what item, what quantity. The ability and opportunity, all that gets shaped by your psychological perspective. So knowing and understanding. So knowledge is important, right? So how much do you know about the product? How much do you understand about the features? This all helps attitude formation. So the idea is that, you store information, you gather it in your mind, and then you retrieve it when you need to at the time of making a decision when it comes to buying something. So if you're informed, if you're really aware of I buy too much of this, I'm not going to buy any more. I have too many shirts. I don't need another shirt. Last time I bought a shirt, it stayed in my closet for 6 months, so I'm not going to buy another one. See, you're going back, you're reliving, you're remembering that the last time you bought a shirt, because you have so many, you didn't even wear it. So that's an example of you're going back to your memory, retrieving the information that you have. And an attitude formation, which is, I'm buying too much, I'm going to buy less. Or the other way around, it's that, you bought a shirt, you really liked it, you want another one, and because you remember getting a good deal and having such a good experience, you're going to go back to that same place and getting it. So it can work both ways in terms of buying or not buying something. Then there's the decision-making process. So you have to recognize that you need to buy something, right? We call that problem recognition, right? So you start off with there's a problem, like, whoops, something broke, or I need this, or I want this. And then you do the information search. So you start looking up your choices, maybe you comparison shop. It does depend on the item. Certain items require you to do more research than others. Then you make your call. You decide from the alternatives which one to use. You decide, you buy it. Then you have your post-decision making section where you have to think about, after you make your decision, you're going to go and buy it, right? And once you buy it, overall, are you satisfied with your purchase or not? But it doesn't stop there, because a lot of times we tend to stop there when we're observing. Then we have to look at consumer behavior outcomes. So the idea is the adoption, resistance to, or diffusion of innovation. So the idea is that once you acquire the items and you decide to buy it, are you happy that you got that item? Are you satisfied with your purchase? Sometimes you feel guilty about your purchase. You're not happy. It didn't fulfill the needs that you needed, and therefore you tend to feel kind of let down and upset. So all that kind of comes into play when it comes to consumer behavior and your purchase decisions. So we need to look at 5 main steps of the consumer decision-making process or model. You need to know how this works because you're going to be tested on it. So step number 1 is need recognition, right? So the idea is you have to recognize that you want something or you need something, because it could be want or it could be need. But the idea is something happened that requires you to start going through the process of deciding whether you're going to buy something. So need recognition. So an example, refrigerator is starting to make weird sounds. This actually happened to me not that long ago. It's not cooling well. Food's starting to spoil. Uh-oh, that's not good. So that's need recognition. I need a new fridge. Okay. Then I'm going to start the second step, which is search for information. So here, because it's a bigger ticket item, it's not something that costs $5. I'm looking at refrigerators online. I'm looking at Samsung, LG. So I'm looking just on overall, what prices am I looking at? Where can I buy it? Best Buy, Fry's, or whatever, or Sears, or whatever place has appliances. Then I'm going to do step 3, which is evaluate my alternatives. So I'm going to narrow down on the make, model, and budget. So I know that I'm not going to spend more than X amount of money. Probably narrow it down to maybe some brands like Samsung or LG, for example, or Whirlpool. And then I'm going to go to the appliance store and compare the models in person. Once I narrow down, I narrow down where I'm going to go. I'm going to compare it in person so I can finally decide on what model. Then the purchase decision. So step 4 is basically actually making the purchase. So you're going to select the model, any extras that go with it, purchase, schedule the delivery, and have the old model picked up. Then but see, we don't stop there, because I see people that tend to stop there. You have to look at step 5, which is the post-purchase evaluation. You know, did the product deliver on the promises that you got from the marketing, from the message you got, wherever it is that you got the information from, online or in a circular, whatever the case may be, or, you know, an email blast. So did it meet those needs? You know, if it did, it's a positive response. If it didn't, then it's a negative response. So this slide is just a very complete model of the consumer behavior. There's a lot of steps, and no one's going through it and saying, okay, I see some stimuli coming. I'm going through the exposure part. Then my attention's getting peaked, and I'm going through, am I comprehending? No one's going through these steps and like articulating, this is the step I'm in. And yet we go through these steps. It's just not something that you're conscious about. So the idea is, as you can see in the start here, need recognition. And when you'll go back to kind of your past experiences, and based on different things like exposure to issues you've had, or attention, or understanding that, you know, once that refrigerator goes and I know it's too expensive to fix it, I'm going to have to get a new one. See, I start recognizing there's a need for me to get a refrigerator, right? Rather than just fixing it. So you start doing that search, and in that search mode, again, there's influences, whether it's your surroundings, your culture, your individual social class, the family. You know, some people say, don't only buy this brand, or I never buy from this store, or I only buy from this store. Also, how much time you have to evaluate everything, because, you know, if you need a fridge right away, it's not like you can sit there and mull it over for 2 weeks, right? So you have to make a decision fairly quickly. So that matters too. And when you start evaluating alternatives, making the purchase, again, this is where individual differences, this is where we see those variances. So, you know, how many, you know, access to resources. Do you have a lot of money? Are you limited on funds? Because sometimes when you're limited on funds, you buy only what you can afford, not necessarily what you want. And how motivated and involved are you in the decision-making process? If someone else decided for you, you're not that involved. And how motivated are you? Well, you know, if it's really important, you tend to be more motivated. And sometimes when it's not, you're not. So also your knowledge and previous knowledge, again, on the subject matter and on that particular product, and your interest level, you know, some of your personality. You know, some people like buying appliances and picking out the finishes, and other people hate it. It just depends. So need recognition. So you have to recognize that a need needs to be satisfied, right? So lots of things can trigger that. If your current product isn't performing properly, or as it's expected to perform, when you're running out of something, sometimes the product could be just fine and performing fine, but another product just seems better. It just looks nicer. It looks better. So, hey, I want that one. So this is where marketing kind of really kicks in. So it helps consumers kind of recognize, but sometimes not recognize, sometimes create an imbalance between what you have, your present state, what you have in terms of products, and what you want. So sometimes they'll tell you, no, like you need to get You need to buy, you can have frozen pizza, but you need to get the fresh pizza delivered to you. So that's where marketing kind of kicks in, where it's like sometimes to help you recognize a need, but sometimes create a need. So two main things that we look at is internal and external stimuli to see what activates an actual need. So the idea is that we look at differences between kind of what your ideal is and what the actual situation is, right? And is it big enough to trigger a decision? So the difference, is it big enough to get you to act? So internal stimuli is a personal perception, things that you've experienced, and external is outside influences. So internal are things like hunger, thirst, loneliness. If you're hungry and you pass by the vending machine and those chips look really good, then you go get it, right? So that stimulated something. That was an internal stimuli that got you to move and buy something. Now, external is maybe an advertisement or word of mouth. Your friend said, oh my gosh, you have to try these. They're so good. Or, everyone's using it. So you go get it because everyone else has it. Or you just saw an ad and you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, or that sounds good. Let me go get it. So, and it could be also a combination of both. It could be, something you're feeling, and then you see an ad and go, yep, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to get pizza from Domino's, for example. So you could have an internal stimuli like you're hungry, and then you see the ad and that convinces you to go get pizza from that place versus your other choices, because you have choices. So next step is search for information. So you can do internal and external search. So you need to understand the difference between both. So internal is you're kind of scanning your experience, your memories, recalling anything you've experienced in the past, knowledge, problems that you've had, similar problems. So pretty much most of the time, I put often, but most of the time guided by personal experience. So if you're considered an item that you use a lot, you frequently purchase, and that's enough to trigger the purchase, because you're going to go ahead and, I buy this all the time and I'm going to go get some more. It could also be an internal search to not buy something. So I for the longest time, my family was very loyal to Sony products, and the last, I think, 5 Sony products just were defective, didn't last, and they were expensive, and I said no more. So now I avoid that brand like the plague. I don't want it. And recently, with my appliances, anything that was Kenmore was breaking down. So guess what? I don't want to look at the Kenmore brand at all. I am avoiding every Kenmore appliance broke down on me within a space of, a month. So I don't want to look at that brand. I don't want to look at it. I am avoiding it like you have no idea. I'm avoiding it because I'm having a bad experience. That's my internal search. Now, someone else can tell me, oh no, it's amazing, it's great. Doesn't matter. I've had bad experiences and I no longer want to buy from that brand. Any brand but that brand. So that's internal. External may be necessary when past experience is insufficient. Maybe, I've never bought an appliance, so then I can't go by that, right? So that wouldn't help me. So, and the risk of making a wrong decision, sometimes it's high. So that's when you you'll go to word of mouth, personal, a friend, a recommendation. Those are big. Some studies are showing the millennials tend to look at more personal recommendations. Public sources online, you have tons of information online. Consumer reports, customer reviews, those are really helpful. Ratings that people give. We have tons of stuff, online where, TripAdvisor or any of these kind of websites where you can actually rate and you can see, the rating and read comments to see if that's a place or a service that you want to acquire. So marketer-dominated sources, so salespeople, advertising, that's another external search. And other sources that are maybe experiential. So like people handling the product. So whatever you have access to, that's what you're going to be looking at. So you look at the Evoke set, which is a group of brands from which you can choose from. There are some brands that you may not be able to choose from, but in Evoke set, you can choose from those. And then comes the evaluation of alternatives. So this is where you're going to evaluate all the information you've gathered, all the researching, all the comparison shopping. You tend to look at multiple attributes. Usually it's not just one. although it can happen, I suppose. But usually you look at different attributes and each can be weight, might carry a different weight. And you kind of compare the alternatives against the criteria. So if you were to compare, let's say you needed a Mac model, you can look at the MacBook, the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro, the iMac Pro, the Mac Pro, the Mac Mini. You can even look at the iPad, and you would compare, right? What's the criteria? All those are just from the same brand. That's just one brand. I'm not even giving an example of you comparing brands there with the same brand, but you have different criteria that you might be looking at. Then the evaluation of alternatives. So you're going to, during the evaluation of alternatives, you're going to look at those attributes. So things that are most commonly you look at tends to be quality, price, and certain features. And sometimes certain features are important for one person and they're not important to another. So it does depend on the individual. But you have to determine the degree of importance, which attribute matters most to you, right? Because they're not going to all matter equally always. What do you believe of each available brand, right? Like I just gave you an example where I have a negative past experience. I'm going to have a negative belief on that brand. And how satisfied, based on what you're looking, how satisfied would I have to be with each product? Certain things like, close enough, it just needs to get the job done, or others, I better love it because this is what I'm going to have for the next 5 years, for example. And then you're going to choose, again, based on one or more attributes. And when things seem equal, there usually has to be one attribute that you're going to allow for it to be the deciding factor. Now, when it comes to the buying process, there is an initiator, the person who first suggests or thinks the idea of buying something. There is the influencers, someone whose advice carries weight. And that's why these digital influencers they make money, a lot of money online. And they're influencers. That's what they're called. That's their job now, their position. They're influencers. They have influence. Their opinion carries weight. There's a decider who ultimately actually makes a final buying decision. The person who actually makes the purchase, that's the person rendering the money. They may not necessarily be using it because there's a user, and that's the person who actually consumes the product or service. They're not all necessarily the same person. Okay, often they are, but not always. And one thing that you have to look at is consumer involvement. We'll be looking at that in the next last part, part 3 of this lecture. So we're going to be looking at certain products just tend to need extensive involvement. So, and those are more limited. And then there's items that are routine. So you're not going to sit there and compare, if you have to buy socks, you tend to go with what socks you typically buy. You're not going to sit there and really start comparing and sit there and then go to Amazon and then go in person to Kohl's and then go to JCPenney and then go to Macy's and, for a package of white socks. You're not going to do that. That's a routine item. So you're not going to do that comparison shopping. Now, wedding dress, that might be different. A car, that's way different. A big appliance, that's also different. Things that are more expensive that you're not typically buying all the time, they require more extensive involvement versus those routine items. And then there's stuff in between, where it's like, it's kind of unfamiliar brand maybe, or a category, or you don't want to be stuck with something you just don't want. So that would require limited involvement. So in the next part, we're going to dissect that a little bit further. So we can really look at and get you to thinking as to what prompts you to go when you go through that consumer buying process. Okay, thanks for listening.